Welcome back to Between the Levees. I'm joined today by Miss Taylor O'Brien. She works for CSC Sugar, a customer of Ingram Barge. So that's the connection we had before. I've been trying to get this done for quite some time. She is a SUNY grad and I'm sure has much more to her story. But to begin with, Taylor, thank you very much for joining me on the show.
Thank you for having me on.
Let's begin here. Tell me a little bit about what it is you do for CSC Sugar.
So I've been working for CSC Sugar for about 2.5 years now, and I work in maritime logistics. So in regards to shipping, I'm in charge of basically the chartering of the vessel, from fixing contracts with vessel owners to loading, the voyage, and then the discharge port, and basically all the ins and outs in between. And then our connection with Ingram is I'm in charge of the barge logistics and operations at CSC Sugar too. So we move a lot of sugar from Louisiana to our refineries in Covington and Ohio.
And those ships, is that all inbound? Is all imported sugar?
Yeah, we're bringing all sugar into the United States from a lot of it is from Central America, Mexico, and then we do some from Brazil and South Africa as well.
What is the volume comparison from imported sugar versus what we produce down here?
So our company last year, we imported around 900,000 tons of sugar into the United States. Probably more, but chartering, that's what we did.
I'm sure it's nowhere close, but how much did you barge up?
About 140,000, I believe. And that's
Okay.
all from basically Louisiana sugar.
And where does all that sugar go?
So basically our refineries in Covington and Cincinnati, Ohio. And then we have refineries there, which then melts the sugar, liquefies it, and then they distribute it to their customers.
Well, of course, I see about 5 years ago you graduated from SUNY Maritime. What led you to this industry and to that curriculum?
So I grew up in Northport on Long Island in New York State my whole life. I'm currently living here still now. And ever since I was young, my family has always been, sailors on, sailboats around the Long Island Sound. So I grew up sailing for leisure, competitively, basically from 8 years old to 16 years old, racing on small dinghy boats. And then my uncle sailed on, he bought a J105. So I crewed for him, just regattas around Long Island. That's about a 38-foot boat. So that was really exciting. Just learning what I knew from 8 to 16 to the largest scale on a 38-foot boat. I actually went to a different college after I graduated high school. I went to Oneonta because I was also a lacrosse player in college. Played there, was majoring there, kind of felt like I could keep going, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So then my mom had brought up SUNY Maritime. And at first I was like, no way am I going there. It's a military school. That's not what I want to do. And she kept saying, but you love the water so much. You love sailing. It can be a great career path for you. It's like one thing that I really wish, people say your parents are mostly right sometimes. And if I would have just listened a little earlier, then I would have went to Maritime earlier. But anyways, about probably 3 years later, I ended up applying to Maritime. So I started there January of 2016. And that's when I started to understand the difference between sailing on a sailboat to sailing on ships that are hundreds of feet long.
And you mentioned lacrosse. What were you studying at that first university?
So I changed my major probably about 3 times, but I started in early childhood education. And then I went to nutrition. And then I think when I transferred out, think I was just taking classes that would transfer at that point. So, but that was fun. It was a good college experience. I was there for 2 years. I was able to play lacrosse, which was great. But yeah, just nothing really sparked my interest in regards to what do I want to do for the rest of my life there. I was focused on lacrosse mainly.
Well, tell me about your time at SUNY, entering into more of a military style and kind of how that curriculum went.
So I was 23 when I went in. And when you go in, since I was still doing my undergraduate degree, you're basically the bottom of the totem pole. At the age of 23, I had a bunch of 19-year-olds yelling at me, telling me to march or do push-ups or what have you. And it really wasn't as bad as I thought. It was more of just like getting over that mental hump that they're supposed to know what they're doing over me for the training aspect. It was indoctrination, it's called. It's about 10 days of, no cell phones. You're living on the ship. This is like before classes start. And since I got in January, it was, the middle of winter in the Northeast. And I think if I remember correctly, there were some days where it was about, 18 degrees and we're out on deck, learning about the training ship and whatnot. But I definitely, regardless of the, military aspect, the ship itself and learning about navigation and a lot of knot tying that I had already known, I felt like I was on the right path finally, which was really, eye-opening and, just a good feeling in general.
Well, tell me about that curriculum. What was your favorite course? What most interesting thing you learned out there?
So my favorite part about the curriculum at Maritime is definitely the training ship, the summer sea term. You get hands-on learning, from people that are in the industry that come and work for the summer to basically teach the cadets. And they're all really knowledgeable sailors in the industry. Just names that you hear over and over again from sailing, now that I know them from sailing in the industry. But that's definitely was my favorite part, because you're just the hands-on experience that you're getting. You're standing your watch with a mate in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and you can just kick back and say, all right, this is what I'm going to do for the, how many years of my life. This is pretty awesome. And then the other perks where you were able to, go to Ireland and Spain and all these pretty wonderful places for a couple days when you were in port. So that was definitely the highlight of being at Maritime.
Any interesting stories you can share from foreign ports? Maybe a pub in Ireland or something?
There's definitely quite a few stories. Ireland was great because my last name's O'Brien, so I've my background is Irish. Just that whole experience was really fun, and I have two really good friends that are both Irish too. Their last name's Murphy, so we just had a great time in Ireland. And I think at every other port that we went to besides Ireland, our goal was to find an Irish pub in each country, and I think we pretty much nailed it. Yeah, it's just really fun. You're in a different country with a bunch of friends that you're living with for either 45 days or 90 days, depending on what class you are. Yeah, there's like a lot of stories. But I remember the last day we were in Dublin, and I was a third class. So everyone in the third class has to be back by midnight. The second class is 1 a.m. And I think the third class or the first class is 2 a.m., something like that. But there was one, I guess it was a bar club. It was called Deuces. And I think the entire ship cadets were there. It was just so much fun. It doesn't matter what class you are at that point. Everyone was just having a great time. The one thing that is pretty crazy is when we were in, I think it was Barcelona. So that was the second port. We left Dublin. We went to Barcelona. This is my first class cruise. And what Maritime has now, and when I was there, is that 20% of the cadets get pulled for alcohol testing. And I was 20, I think, I was 23 at this point, and you have to be under a 0.04 if you get randomly pulled. So we were on the beach all day, having a great time in Barcelona. And then I think I got a text like, Taylor, you're on the list. And I was like, oh, I'm fine. I haven't had a drink in a couple hours. And, I'm 23. I don't think I look fine. I act fine. I'll be good. Get on the ship and I get pulled. And then they do the breathalyzer and it was a 0.05. I was like, you have to be kidding me. I look at the doctor on board. I was like, look, I'm 23 years old. I'm a very responsible person. You probably didn't even know that I had any cocktails today or whatnot. But so then Captain Hanth is she was the deputy commandant, and she came in and I have words for her, but we don't have to get into that. But yeah, so then you basically get what's called gold, which you're restricted to the ship, and then you get restricted on land. But in the next port, they were able to give me what it's called sanity leave, so you can get off the ship for 6 hours. It's just all ridiculous. I mean, I get it, and it's from trying to teach cadets from what happened with the Exxon Valdez and alcohol at sea or whatever, which is fine. But I do think it was a little crazy because it really did mess up my mug cruise. But I had 2 more to go on to have fun, which was fine. But yeah, gold is something that you don't want at Maritime. Most of the good sailors that graduate end up getting gold in their Maritime career. So I guess it's like a way of passage in a way.
Well, you mentioned Exxon Valdez. I admittedly know very little about it. I remember when it happened on the news, but I wasn't paying it any attention at the time. Was alcohol related?
Yeah, so there's basically is the captain is in charge of the vessel no matter what. There was a third mate on watch that was transiting, I don't know what part of Alaska, but captain wasn't available or wasn't coming up to the bridge or whatnot. And to my knowledge, he was out the night before or something. Captain Hazelwood is his name. Very respectable man. But the Exxon Valdez did happen, and there had to be repercussions in the industry to negate that from happening again. I did find it pretty interesting, though, that I found out that Captain Hazelwood used to play pool in Huntington here with my grandfather.
We are skipping around a little bit here. In foreign ports, where did you find the biggest language barrier issues?
So majority of the ports, I would think, from my experience, people really speak English. And if they don't, then I felt that it was easy to communicate with people. I felt like maybe the hardest port to communicate with was when we were in Malta, because I don't really even remember what language that was. But, say you go out to lunch and you have, some food, some drinks, and you're getting the bill with the number on it. You point out on the menu what you want. You didn't really have to do a lot of communication in aspects like that. I would think more on tours and stuff. There was more of a communication barrier if you were trying to find something or get something. But if you had a map on you, for example, pointing stuff out, I felt like that was the best way to communicate if you didn't know where to go, if you're asking for directions, to have a map on you to they can point out what things are, what you're looking for, or whatnot. But for majority, I would say people speak or understand English, so they were able to communicate with you.
What was your favorite stop along the way?
The Canary Islands was pretty cool. You know, all of Europe, it's a different world over there. Everything's a little slower, in my opinion, which is nice. People are more active, walking everywhere, biking everywhere. But I do think the Canary Islands was very, it was just beautiful. The beaches, the people were very nice. It's like a very touristy place for Europeans. So I think that's why it was a good area, because it was kind of like a vacation spot for Europeans as well.
How long did it take to get from New York to the first stop?
So depending on what class you were, your third class year, it's a 45-day trip. So you're either doing the first half or the second half. So I met the ship in Ireland. So from Ireland, we did Barcelona and then Malta. And then we transited back. So your first or second class, you're doing either first half or second half of the summer sea term. And then if you're first class, you're on the entire time. So my first class cruise, we left New York and our first stop was Puerto Rico. So we went down to Puerto Rico for the first port, and then we went over the Atlantic. The thing with the training ship is, for training purposes and to keep fuel efficiency down, we would go very slow across the Atlantic, especially because when you're going across the Atlantic, that's the best time to do your celestial navigation, because you're not close to land. You don't have to worry about lights or land impacting your star shots or your sun shots. So we went slow. I think it was like 2 weeks, to go, and then 2 weeks to come back. They try to keep it around that, and then we can do circles if we want to slow time down. It was very, just for fuel efficiency and then training purposes, it was very slow, but it was good. It's kind of crazy. You would never think, you only hear about the winter North Atlantic. The seas are treacherous, but there's days in July where the Atlantic Ocean looks like a lake. It's pretty unreal, flat as can be, no wind. It kind of feels like you're in the abyss at some point, because there could be no other ships or anything around you for miles. So that's pretty cool.
Well, actually, the son of an upcoming guest is, I believe, in school in the Great Lakes right now. And a topic of conversation with his father, who is going to publish here coming soon, mentioned he was watching his son go through celestial navigation exercises and how difficult it was. This is an old towboater, he never did this stuff.
Yeah.
What's the process? What is that? Is that
So it's basically before GPS or anything back in the day, you would take basically shots with your sextant. Every ship has a sextant. They still do have a sextant. And you're either taking shots of the stars, the sun. You would want to get one an hour. So if you're on a 4-hour watch, the goal would be to get 4 star sights or sun sights for the 4 hours. And then from all the information, you do some calculations, but you should be able to pinpoint, you should have 4 lines going through, and that could be your position, at noon or whatever time that you're either forwarding or going back based off of your shot. And I mean, I was doing it, I took sun shots when I was working, just to make time go by. It is pretty cool once you think about it. I do think it's one of the harder curriculums at Maritime, because you're like, why do I have to do this? I can just look at the GPS and I know my lat and long and plot my course. But there is something about learning celestial and what everyone had to do years ago. If you didn't, and if there was no sun or stars, if you couldn't see the cloud, if there was too cloudy, you were just going on your last point. So you were basically trying to hold that course and hope that the wind or the current isn't impacting your steering purposes. But Celestial, I would definitely say it's the hardest course for a deck deck license. But once you pick it up, it's kind of like riding a bike. It's pretty easy. But I definitely think that's one of the harder curriculums for the deck department, at least. Definitely not for the engine side.
Some SUNY grads I've had on the show, I think were in school well ahead of you. Was there any part of the curriculum that was focused on the inland and western rivers of the United States?
So I don't think so. I know like the reason I feel like people that go to a maritime school like find out about the river in general is through job fairs. You know, Kirby coming up and talking about what they do on the river. But nothing really stands out. And that's because you're getting the US Coast Guard unlimited license that you're really trained to go to sea and use that license. I think they should be bringing that into the curriculum because it's such a major part of the maritime industry, especially for the United States, that I think it is really important, and they should come up with a class or maybe some type of simulation when we do bridge resource management and you're in the simulator, you know, do those waterways. I will say when I took my ECTIS class, one of my teachers, Mate Schubert, he worked in the Gulf and would always talk about coming in and out of Fushan. So I feel like we did a lot of simulations of coming into Fushan, which was pretty cool. You know, the boat handling that you need when you're doing that is pretty immaculate. But it's really just, there was not really courses based off that, which I think they should definitely add that, even as an elective for students, because it is such a major part of our industry.
Well, was your barging responsibilities at CSC your first introduction to the barging world?
Yes. And I kind of got thrown into it, which is fine. Because it is such part of the industry that I really didn't know about and I'm still learning about. And I think your podcast really helps with that, because when I'm listening, you know, you're hearing captains, you know, boat handling, which is so important. And then especially with the river levels, the past couple of years, they've just been bone dry, that it has an effect on, you know, how many barges can move at one time on one tow. Yeah, so it's definitely been a learning experience for me in barging in the past, I would say 2 years. Mm-hmm.
Well, how did you find this podcast originally?
I think you had texted me about it when because we've had communications through Ingram, and then when you told me that you had a podcast, I was like, that's great, because I've actually been trying to find podcasts that have to do specifically with the river, because there's only so much you could ask questions about and want to learn more. So I think really hearing it from you and then listening to the podcast has really expanded my knowledge about the industry. And it is pretty cool to hear the stories that, you know, some of these river guys and gals have that you would never know of. It's pretty it's cool. It's a learning experience as well as, you know, stories of the river and whatnot, which is always good.
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool too. This podcast experiment has certainly grown beyond what I expected
That's
up when I
great.
first started this thing. But one more question before we dive back into your personal story or your details of your life and career. This came to mind. I wrote it down and I haven't asked it yet. But while you were in Dublin, first of all, how long were you there?
I think we were there for 4 days.
Did you find opportunity to get that perfect Guinness?
I did not go to the Guinness factory, which is kind of funny because I love Guinness. But I think we tried to go, and the line to get in was like a 2-hour wait. And we were like, well, do we really want to waste 2 hours doing that? And some people did, and I really did tell them, I was like, I know how to pour Guinness. I worked at, an Irish bar for 8 years at least. And they do know how to pour Guinness. But I will say that any bar in Ireland, they know how to pour Guinness. I did not have a bad pint in Ireland, which was great.
Yeah, Guinness was my first love in the beer world. I've had something maybe close to perfect down here, but who knows? Anyway, all right. So you mentioned sailing as a child. Tell me about your childhood, what your parents did for a living, and of course, in our kind of pre-interview, I noticed a post on LinkedIn about 9/11, 2001. So obviously many, many years before your maritime career began. But tell me, I guess, where were you on 9/11? What do you remember of that time? And then fill me in on the rest of your life up to the point of going to SUNY.
Okay. So I was in 4th grade when 9/11 happened. Mr. Pellegrino's class in Ocean Avenue School. I will say I don't really remember what was going on at that time. I felt like I was so young, and then that the aftermath really affected me more. Because my father is a retired New York City fireman. So thankfully, he was not there when the planes crashed. Because a lot of his buddies were not able to come out on the other side. My mother's uncle, or my mother's second cousin, who got my dad into the fire department, he was a battalion chief, Chief Donald Burns, and he actually died that day. Went in and just didn't come back out. So my dad is definitely very lucky to still have him in my life. I will say though, again, talking about 9/11, it was more of the aftermath that I think was ingrained into my memory. My dad was gone for days and days and days, either at cleanup at Ground Zero, or, wakes and funerals of firemen that have passed, police officers that had passed, anyone. If they weren't at Ground Zero, they were at a wake. They'd come home for a day and then repeat. That was my most impacted, I think, memory about 9/11. But it hits different in New York, for sure. Depending on how old you were, someone that was either there or affected by the incident. It's kind of crazy when you think about it. But
more than kind of crazy. That was a hell of a day.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, very thankful that my dad's still here and retired, so he can enjoy his life now. But yeah, going back to Northport and sailing, I grew up here in Northport, in a big Irish family, which is always fun. But yeah, I grew up at a Northport Yacht Club, sailing. My grandfather loved sailing. My uncles are great sailors. My whole family was very active in the sailing industry, I would say, on the Sound. Grew up sailing small boats from opties, which are small little dinghies that look like bathtubs, to sailing lasers, which is, again, a solo boat, but way faster. Racing on the Long Island Sound, different yacht clubs that would host regattas, which I think really pushed the love for just being on the water in general. And there's something about just being on the water, sailing with your friends, not even racing. I would say it's a very cool hobby to have. But it did lead into the love of the water, into the career, which is really great. I have lifelong friends from growing up here, especially from the Northport Yacht Club. I'm actually engaged to my fiance, Evan, who we met sailing at the Northport Yacht Club. So I definitely have a strong bond, and we're getting married there. to growing up on the water, and blessed that I was able to grow up in a very quaint town where everybody knows everybody.
Well, does anything else come to mind from your time in college before SUNY and then during?
I really think just trying to find my way to SUNY was the best thing that happened. Again, I should have listened to my mother right away when she brought it up, because it would have saved me 3 years. But at the same time, it was probably better that I went in a little later, because I knew when I was there that this is what I want to get my career through. I want to get my license. And my license expires this year, so I'm doing renewal classes at Maritime to keep it active as well, which is really good. But yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
What's the renewal process for your license?
So over the course of the 5 years, as long as you were sailing in that time, you don't have to take extra classes. You really just have to take these like 4 core classes, or 3, I think, which is advanced firefighting. It's really just STCW classes that you need. I know there's 3, I don't remember what they are, but SUNY offers them for renewal, which is really great.
Well, of course, you finished SUNY Maritime in 2019. It looks like you go to work for Lindblad Expeditions. Is that how you pronounce that?
Yes.
What was that job? It looks like it was a 7-month deal, and then fill me in up to the point of joining CSC.
Yeah, so after I graduated, I traveled a little bit, looking for, if I want to live in the Northeast or what I want to do. I had a few friends that started working for Lindblad Expeditions, which is basically the National Geographic Adventure Cruises. So after speaking with them and having not the best success in finding a job, because you want to go to sea, but you don't want to sit around in a union hall. So you have to try to be proactive. So that's why I took the National Geographic job, which ended up being, I think, cooler than I thought it was going to be. So I started off as a deckhand there, and then started sanding watches into my second hitch. So I met them in shipyard in Vallejo, California. Sailed with them down to Mexico, which was pretty cool because it's like 100-passenger cruise vessel, and the guests are on for about 7 days, so you kind of get to recognize faces. But like a day in the life of a deckhand on a Lindblad boat is every time you anchor around a certain area or a port. It's an adventure cruise, so we're lowering these, I would say, 10 to 12 foot Zodiacs into the water, and you're just driving around guests to see different animals or talk about different historic stuff, because you have expedition leaders, National Geographic expedition leaders giving the tour, which is pretty cool. You also have paddle boards and kayaks on there, which they do guided tours for. So you would be on the Zodiac making sure everyone's together, kind of like a lifeguard, but with kayaks. And then, so from there, we were in California to Mexico. And then I flew home for a month when we were in Mexico. And then the next hitch was, I met the ship in Panama, and it was transiting the Panama Canal to Costa Rica, which was pretty cool. So I got to transit the Panama Canal about, I think it was 3 or 4 times. And then we did a month in Belize, which was pretty incredible. I never thought I would ever go to Belize, but there I was working down there. So that was definitely, I think, the highlight was Belize, and then transiting the Panama Canal. And then COVID happened and the world shut down. So we were on the Costa Rica side. So at least we were on the Pacific side of the Panama Canal, because we had to go lay the ships up in Oakland, California, due to COVID, which that was pretty wild, just being in a different country and everyone freaking out and then being stuck on a ship for, I think, probably took us 2 weeks or maybe 10 days to get from Costa Rica to Oakland, due to the fact that we weren't carrying passengers. Everyone had gotten off the ship in Costa Rica and they were able to get home, but we had to take the ship back up. And I think we were going 8 knots from Costa Rica to Oakland, California. So it did take a long time. And we were basically just getting the ship ready to be laid up until people knew what was going to happen. And then flying home, I think there was 3 people on my flight from California to New York. It was a very weird time, especially when you were not in the States for the start of the pandemic. You kind of jumped in April, and it was definitely a shell shock for sure. But no one was going on cruises. The cruise industry shut down. So again, looking for another job. I ended up driving the launch boat for a little while at the yacht club that my parents were members of. And then I called the union hall to try to get anything. I would go on as an AB, I would go on as a mate. I just needed to get back on the water, for work and just to keep sailing. So finally I got a call from, I think it was from the union, saying that they had a position to go on as an AB, on the vessel Page, which was in Diego Garcia. And I immediately said, absolutely. I don't have to go on as a mate. I will go on as an AB. And that was with Sealift. So when I was talking with Sealift, they kind of explained the job to me, and what was going to happen. So when vessels are in Diego Garcia, which is in the middle of the ocean, it's owned by the Brits, but we have ships there. You're kind of just housing military stuff is the best way I can put it. So you're not really sailing from port to port. You're in the lagoon and you go out like once a month to make sure everything's running smoothly. And then if you need to go to Singapore for anything, you go to Singapore for stores or classification stuff for the vessel. But finally, like when I took the job, found out a little more about Diego Garcia, and the partnership, I guess they have with Military Sealift Command. So since it was COVID, they had to take a charter flight. So everyone that was going to Diego Garcia was on a chartered flight, so that when they got there, that flight can take all the crew and officers that have been probably stuck on there for months trying to get off the ship can go home. Because previously they would just use, Air Force planes to get people to either Singapore or Bahrain at a Navy base, and then they'd fly back to the States from there. So due to COVID, we had to do a 2-week quarantine before boarding the plane, in a hotel in Virginia. And it was a very strange process, I will have to say. First time really joining a commercial ship, I had no idea what I was expecting. And then you're kind of stuck in a hotel room for 2 weeks, hoping you don't pop positive for COVID and get sent home. So when I got there, I actually knew the third mate that I was going on the ship with. So that was, I guess, helpful in a transitioning way. But then by day 10, he tested positive for COVID. And there was another gentleman with me that also went to SUNY. I didn't know him, but he also had a third mate's license and he was going on as an AB. So basically the captain said, you both have the same qualifications as for a third mate. We're just going to have you both work as ABs for a week when we're there. and then we're going to promote one of you to third mate. So I was really happy when I got there, did a week of work as an AB, and then they promoted me to the third mate spot, which was great because it's a lot more money, and that's what we're all out here to do. But yeah, so then I was in Diego Garcia, working on the vessel, the MV Page, for Sea Lift for, I think it, from leaving home to coming home, it was about 5 months. So then, yeah, I got home, I think 2 days before Thanksgiving of 2020. Yeah. That was great. But it's definitely a different kind of shipping because you're not, loading, discharging cargo. You're kind of just making sure the ship is able to move when it is called. So you did a lot of deck work, and I did a lot of safety work as a third mate. We're at anchor for majority of our time, so you're standing in anchor watch. We were able to go to Singapore though, because we had to get basically our classification surveys done. But when we were in Singapore, it was COVID, so we were not able to get off the ship, which kind of stinks. Because that would have been, everyone talks about Singapore, which is just a cool city. But transiting, the Singapore Straits and the Malacca Straits and standing watch on the bridge during those times, it was pretty intense. People talk about it, you don't believe them, what the little fishing boats can do or will do when you have a 800-foot ship coming down and they're just going to cross your bow back and forth because their nets are there and you're heading towards them. So that was a good experience, I would say. So yeah, I did 2 hitches with Sea Lift as a third mate. And then finally on my last hitch, I kind of felt like I didn't want to keep doing this again. And I think at that point I was 28, dating my fiance. I kind of wanted to try to find a shoreside position to settle down in a way. So I started looking when I was at sea, when I get off watch. We were able to have internet, which is great. So I was just trying to research job opportunities for, I guess, logistics or operations. And I went through SUNY Maritime to try to find employment because they send out lists of companies hiring all the time. So I got an email from Maritime with the CSC job profile. And then I reached out and I spoke with Captain Kevin Roach, who we spoke about. And he interviewed me, and I've been with CSC since 2021, August of 2021. I literally got off the ship, and a week later, I was at my new job.
What was it like meeting and interviewing with and working for Captain Roach?
So he was definitely a very interesting man. I definitely think that when you first come across him, he seems like a very regular guy, respectable captain. But he has his quirks in the way that he wants things done a certain way. When you speak with him, you don't really, I don't know. He was a very great guy, but you didn't know what side you were gonna get. But he did, I will say, he brought me in, and he really taught me the beginnings of barges. I mean, because he was running the barge operations at CSC before he became a consultant for them. So then that's when I got past the reins to take over the more day-to-day operations for barges. But very, very interesting man. He sailed, in the merchant marine for the Brits in their merchant marine. So he went all the way up to captain. So yeah, very respectable.
Before we get to my last question, which ties into your time with CSC, do you have any interesting memories, or tell me about the experiences transiting the Panama Canal, and you seem to pause on Belize for some reason.
So I really, you, you don't know what you're gonna get when you're going through the canal. They tell you, and where we met the ship in Cologne, very like impoverished area, very impoverished. So you just see a lot of stuff and you think, that you're very thankful. And then you're going through the canal and these guys just start coming on the ship. And you don't have to do anything. Like these guys that just work in the canal, they come on the ship and they make sure that your vessel's tied up correctly and it's moving through the locks. And the pilots that come on, they do this every day and they're so knowledgeable about it. It is pretty cool. They're masters at their job 100%. And it is kind of crazy thinking back at it now. It used to be 40 to 50 ships would go through the canal a day. And this year with the water levels, even there being very low, I think they dropped to about 18 ships per day, due to the water levels in the canal right now. Belize was just absolutely, I've never seen bluer water in my life. It was absolutely incredible. We were in Belize for a month. So I believe the month of February is when we were in Belize. And yeah, just the people, the locals, everyone that I encountered, just happy people living in absolute paradise. You could walk out so far into the water and still see the sand on the bottom. It was incredible. Definitely a good experience, and something I will remember forever, because you could be hanging out on the beach getting paid to make sure the paddleboarders are getting on their paddleboarders correctly, and you're in this tropical island that is beyond beautiful. Pictures just don't do it justice.
Well, under normal conditions, water levels and whatnot, how long does it take to transit that Panama Canal?
So we take a stop in the canal, so the guests can go on a tour. So we're there for a day. So we'd realistically, you transit the canal in, depending on what vessel you are, I would think within, a couple hours. Because we go through, and the first spot is probably 5 hours to get to where we anchor in the lake, in Panama. So I would think we're out on the other side. I would say it's 12 hours all in all to transit.
Well, that does lead me to my final question. With CSC, of course, you're introduced to barging with Captain Roach. What was the most surprising or interesting thing you learned on the job? And then after I bothered you about this podcast and you started listening, what kind of things have you heard or learned that maybe you weren't expecting?
I definitely was thrown into the barge operations, which is great because it's such a niche industry, but so large at the same time. I really learned about what products are traveling on the river at any time of day, from grains to coals to anything that is going up or down the river. I will say that listening to your podcast is great in the fact that there's so many of these crazy boat handlers that you have 40 to 50 barges on one tow and you're going around a bend, and these guys they could do it with their eyes closed. It's pretty impressive to hear the stories about that. And I will say, I feel like the most impressive thing that I've learned about the industry is that these towboats can push, 40 to 50 barges on a tow, and it's normal. It's everyday work. Especially when river levels are high. I haven't been around to experience that, but it's a totally different boat handling aspect for those captains. So I give kudos to all those guys and gals that are driving those boats around the bends. You don't know what's coming around the other side. You definitely really need your rules of the road book memorized in order to execute the transits, which is great.
Do you have any questions for any of my guests that you've listened to?
Oh, not off the top of my head. That's a good one though. I probably had them at the time I was listening and then never wrote them down.
Well, keep some notes because I'm happy to reach
I
out to
will.
them and ask these questions of people that are listening and watching because the YouTube and Spotify stats are not impressive, I guess, on the views, but it's very well received. I'm very happy to see it
Great.
become what it is now.
Oh,
Uh,
definitely.
I think that'll just about do it, Taylor. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
No, I really appreciate you doing this podcast. It really just gets the word out about our industry. And I mean, I share podcasts all the time now that I like and listen to on social media. So I hope that helps with the increase in viewers.
I do too. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
We'll be in touch.
Sounds great.
This has been a production of Where You At Studios, LLC.